Thank you all for coming. This is a fantastic turnout. So I'm Michael Chovan-Dalton. I'm the host of the Real Photo Show. It's a podcast about photography, and it is sponsored by the School of Visual Arts MFA Photo, Video, and Related Media Program, which I am very practiced in saying. And of course, my guest tonight is Charles Traub, and we're going to be talking about his new book, Taradiddle, but we'll also be talking about, this is the 30th anniversary of the MFA program. So we'll get into that a little bit. So I'm going to start with a little introduction here. Some of this is taken from Charles's bio, so you may know some of it. And some of it is from an episode I did with Charles, with Connor Pride, who's back there in the audience, which was, gave me some really interesting insight into Charles's life and how his sort of progression in what he thinks about photography, the way he's taught photography, and the way he photographs has sort of come about. So Charles Traub was born in Louisville, Kentucky, studied English Lit at the University of Illinois. After graduating, he and his wife joined the Peace Corps, and soon after arriving in Ethiopia, I think you described it as an anti-American driver rammed your car, and you and your wife were hospitalized. You returned to Kentucky to recover, and your wife didn't make it. To start your life over again. You became friends with Eugene Meatyard, and then that's when your interest in photography sort of more seriously came about. It was through your friendship with, and I think in the episode we recorded, you referred to Eugene Meatyard as Gene.
Right. Most people did.
And so, but you were kind of interrupted because you were drafted into Vietnam. You didn't actually end up going. Yeah, you trained at Fort Polk, Louisiana, in the infamous boot camp that was featured in the documentary Tigerland. But because of some lifelong health issues and your service in the Peace Corps in Ethiopia, you were allowed to be discharged. And it was a change of orders, I believe, that you received, right? Yeah. So then in 1969, you decided to fully pursue photography. You reached out to Aaron Siskin. You sent him maybe some work or some correspondence, and he asked you to come and apply to the Institute of Design in Chicago. And back then, that was a Masters of Science program. You studied with Arthur Siegel and Gary Winogrand. You had a solo show at the Art Institute of Chicago, and then you published your first monograph while you were a grad student called Beach. Just after, okay. In 1971, you began teaching at Columbia College, and you basically remade the program, right? You remade the program to reflect what was a growing interest in photography at the time, and there were two big reasons for that. One was the movie Blow Up, which, in doing the podcast, I've heard that several times, and that was kind of a horrible movie. Right. No, it wasn't horrible at the time, right? But there was also, at the time, this just stream of images coming in from Vietnam through everyone's television. Also at the time, there's this fascination with suburbia happening, right? And you're taking all those things into account. You created this really new program at Columbia College to reflect these contemporary trends. And you started a lecture series on contemporary trends at Columbia College. And then you became after becoming chair of the program, right?
There were others involved, but yes, I did.
Yeah. And at that point, you founded the Chicago Center for Contemporary Photography, which is now known as the Museum of Contemporary Photography. It's really the backbone, the heart of the visual arts program at Columbia College. And then it was because of this work at Columbia College and the museum work that you were hired to become the director of the Light Gallery. Really, I think probably the most important photography gallery and the only one of its kind at the time. Is that fair to say?
Well, there was Whitkin, there were a couple others, but Whitkin, there was one other. Whitkin was before it, but they were contemporary competitors.
Okay.
Light was quite different.
Right.
Light did more with contemporary.
And Light and then Whitkin really only had one other big competitor, and that would be the Museum of Modern Art at the time, right? I mean, we'll talk a little bit about this, because you've mentioned it. There was this bit of, I don't know if it's competition or just a different philosophy about photography. So Museum of Modern Art under John Sharkovsky, Light Gallery now under you, and the idea of, the important photographers of the time, and both shaped photography and what we think of as the important photography of the time. You showcased Louis Faurer, Ray Metzger, Mario Giacomelli, William Klein, and even Gary Winogrand before the museum. Is that true?
No.
You had that slideshow of Winogrand.
We did William Klein before.
Okay, so, yes.
Important to mention Luigi Gary.
Yeah.
Been lined rejected by the secret.
And then maybe one of the most seminal shows, The New Vision, 40 Years of Photography at the Institute of Design, which featured Art Sinsabow, Ray Metzger, Barbara Crane, and quite a few others. Yes? Thank you. So your first major body of work in color was Street Portraits, in 1976. Which continued through your move to New York City, and you had a solo show at the Light Gallery of your work. And between moving from Chicago to New York, you started the series Lunchtime.
Right, that's the Street Portraits, yeah.
Right.
The book is up there for anybody else.
And then through your work at the Light Gallery, of course, showing all the, changing, I think, the importance of, the way we think of photography as art, the way we think of who were the seminal photographers of their time. But then during the 80s, you did some commercial work. And that commercial work was with, oh boy, I'm very sorry, I'm blanking on your partner's name.
I'll fill it. Jerry Gordon.
Jerry Gordon. And Jerry Gordon taught here for a little while.
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
We, just to clear up, a couple of things.
Yeah.
The Light Gallery had two major directors before me. I didn't build the Light Gallery, I extended its vision, I think. Harold Jones was very important to mention. And was the first director, and Victor Schrager came after. And then a succession of other people thereafter. The boom in photography began pretty much in that 1978, 79 period while I was there. So, not because I created it, the whole interest boomed. So, and then I did editorial corporate work, not advertising.
Charles's voice not coming through the PA.
Nope.
Sorry.
Thank you. Hello. Is that good?
Better.
Sorry. I did corporate editorial work and that kind of thing throughout the 80s.
And then in 1987, you were asked to start this graduate program at the School of Visual Arts.
Correct.
You had started designing it then, but the program actually started in 1988. And so that became the MFA Photography, Video, and Related Media Department. Was it always that name from 1988?
No.
Because I got
But
the
it was
name of the
photography and related media. And video very quickly became integral to everything we were doing. Graham Weinbrand came along, I think, a couple of years later, and Ed Bowes, Shelley Silver, and video is now equal. So it's photography, video, and related media. And at the time, just as a little aside, the president said, "What do you mean by related media? I don't get it." And it's just sort of complicated. But now there are all kinds of programs everywhere and anywhere. I'm happy to say you use the same, more or less, title: photography, video, and related media. Well,
And I only bring that up because also I remember you telling me you would also be interested in calling it the lens and screen arts.
That
as
came
well.
later, but
Yeah.
I think ideally it is the lens and screen arts. The other seems like a handful.
Yeah, and
Again, that's been debated whether that's a good title.
and the
So
program.
now I say photography, video, related media, lens and screen arts.
Yeah. But it is your interest in contemporary practices that has really driven you and your work, and you've brought that to all the places you've been at over the years, right?
Yes. In fact,
Yeah.
elaborate on that. I'm a pretty much a straight real-world witness photographer. I don't do installations. I don't do studio work, or tableau, or anything like that. I've done a few things like that, just for fun. But I've always felt that the medium was needing a great expansion in terms of the possibilities that the camera, the lens, the screen are the matrix for all kinds of creativity, anywhere, everywhere, in all disciplines as well. So I really started this program with the idea that we wouldn't have a bias towards one particular modality or medium of the lens and screen arts. And we also started as really the first graduate school to embrace digital. And that was in '88. We had computers. And we were beta sites and Photoshop here.
So I think that brings us to where we are today. You most recently, I'd say, you had a book that was purely a digital book, No Perfect Heroes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a project I got interested in because I was traveling, road tripping everywhere around the country, and I sort of stumbled on a lot of Civil War stuff. And then I was reading several biographies of U.S. Grant, and I realized what a great, remarkable human being he was. And in fact, second to Lincoln, he really did save the Union and had been maligned for well over 100 years. And so I photographed every site that had anything to do with Grant. And I did it in black and white. It was the first black and white work I had done really since the 70s. I thought as a kind of memorial, as a kind of elegy to him, black and white made sense. So I photographed the battlefield, I photographed homes, I photographed the White House, I photographed statues, all kinds of things. And I combined it with text from his own memoir, which is considered by many literati, including Gertrude Stein, Matthew Arnold, Hemingway, and others, as the greatest nonfiction piece of literature of the 19th century, which was written on Grant's deathbed, by the way, and he didn't see it published. It got him out of a great debt. He was swindled in a Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, and it saved him and saved Samuel Clemens as well from financial ruin. Clemens published it. Anyway, I did it as an iBook. It is available as an iBook, and it's never come out in hardback.
Yeah.
But it was an experiment in, here's a way to get voice, text, interactivity all together in one form.
And you promote that idea. You promote the idea of staying current with technology.
I
Staying
think
current.
it's essential for any creative being, visual being, to embrace everything that's possible. I mean, you have to do it all, but don't reject it out of some kind of ideology that this isn't photography or this isn't whatever. It's just amazing. I just came across a book, I forget his name, but of landscapes lit with a drone, a flash on a drone. And I realized, God, what an ingenious idea. Just take light anywhere, at any height, any position. And 3D imagery, all kinds of things are happening. I think every student here has to be knowledgeable at least of the possibilities. And you can't limit them if they are to have a future. Yeah.
Can you all hear in the back okay?
No, not sure.
Okay, I'm going to bring this closer to you.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Talk into that
I'm
mic.
sorry, I apologize. You can ask me to repeat anything, but I don't think it's worth it.
And so, yeah, I bring up all those things because, this new book, Terra Deo, is a kind of culmination of the various philosophies and the progress, or the progression of what you think about photography and what photography is over the years. In the essay written by David Campani, thank you, he talks about, the humor and being a little warped and even a little woeful. And then he talks about the idea, well, if we pull it apart, it's like pulling apart a joke, right? And if you pull apart a joke, then it's no longer funny. But of course, this isn't a joke, right? And it is photography, and there is a little humor, but I also think there's a great amount of humanity in the book as well.
Thank you.
And affection for people, even.
I like them. There's some in the White House, I don't care.
That's right. When you're teaching over the years photography, and you're thinking about the different principles, what you think photography is about, and the way you can describe things. I've also heard you say that just because you are photographing out in the real world, it doesn't mean you can't also be conceptual in nature in photography, right?
I don't understand any of these terms. I hear people, I'm a conceptual photographer. Hell, conceptual. All art is conceptual, all good art at least. There are ideas behind it, there are motivations. They may not be pre-planned initially, but the work unfolds as a concept of thinking, a concept that has its own critical judgment on whatever is being seen, made, constructed, whatever. We have in this program a lot of people who call themselves now installation artists. They're really just display artists. An installation defines a space. The terms are being bandied about too loosely, and also with the kind of prejudice of, well, if you're not a conceptual artist, you're not an important artist. I am a conceptual artist. Photographers have always been conceptual. And so embrace ideas. Photography is about ideas. Art is about ideas. And they come out of the conceiving of one's identity and one's focus as a creative being over a period of time.
We're going to start looking at the work from the book pretty soon. But I wonder if anyone has any questions before we get right to the work about the program, your history, before we start. Yeah, and there are some wireless mics, and they're up there. You could just, thank you. You could just hit the button and turn them on, and there was someone back there as well.
Should I ask the question then?
So I'm recording this episode for a podcast. I won't be able to hear your question, but I'll repeat it as well.
So, hi, my name is Kostas. I'm a graduate some years ago. I have a question. Charles, you witnessed huge change from when you became the chairperson until now, and it just continues to go. It's hard to really frame this question. What would you say, what was the biggest change? I know that, it was an analog time, we have digital times now, but how would you describe the biggest change throughout the years?
Well, I think it's a complicated question because everything changes so fast. So it's really the speed at which, how we make things, see things, deliver things, absorb things, and the amount of imagery and information out there. A sea change, I think, for anybody, at least at my age. I think the big change is the digital fact of life itself, but also in the particular focus, I think, of most of the people in this room, art and photography, or image making. The popularity and sort of universality of art as a commodity, as an entertainment form, it broke out of smaller community. I don't know what the art world is, it's another term I don't care about too much. But, you know, art is part and parcel of every economy. And that grew exponentially, I think, in the last 30, maybe 40 years from where I began. The idea of the number of galleries, the number of shows, the number of exhibitions. A friend of ours just told me about all the things she had seen here in New York in the last several days. I mean, geez, and she only touched a small part of it. And this is true all over the world. So that would be my answer.
You also spoke about the success of the gallery world when we spoke earlier in the podcast. The idea that, you know, there was this sort of, so the growth, the explosion of photography in academia, which created more teachers and more students, and the teachers taught the students, and the students became the supporters of photography, and suddenly there was, right.
I mean, yeah, that's really important. Going back to the 70s and when we taught, that wasn't the only formative person there, but you know, we had courses, photo one courses going around the clock in the 70s, and we were teaching photo history, and people were, every school started doing that, every university and college in America started teaching photography. In the 60s, there were very few places. In the 70s, people from where we graduated, Eileen and I, were teaching everywhere. And then they were teaching people who became teachers. And the popularity of the medium, frankly, was indeed spread through the academic system itself. It created the first collectors, the first knowledgeable people about, specifically about the medium of photography. But also the art world moved in the same way through those kinds of exposures that students were getting everywhere.
And then after 9/11, you started a kind of almost pre-social media crowdsourcing project with the photography exhibition that it was down here at the SVA Gallery, or was it?
No. Here's New York is what you're referring to.
Yes.
It was founded by myself and 3 others. And when I say no one person deserves any credit for that, we ended up with 250 volunteers. We sent that show 45 places around the world, and the website was built. If I click and buy, this is what, 17, 18 years ago, was the most seen website probably in history, maybe still. And we raised $1 million for charity through the sale of pictures at $40 a picture. It is considered to be the seminal crowdsourcing exhibition. And I just want to put a plug in here, if I can, for a new project that I'm working on with Kathy Shore called Shot We the People, which is going to be an interactive website to collect anything to do with gun violence in America. Pictures, data, information. We just got a nonprofit status, and we have the prototype built, and anybody can put pictures in it, take pictures out, curate it, do whatever they want for political, social, ethical, moral, creative purposes. It should be up and running, we think, hopefully after Christmas.
Yeah. I think we had a question a little farther back. Yes. Was there a question?
Lyle had a question.
Lyle had a question.
He disappeared?
Disappeared.
Oh.
Well, that bump.
Were there other questions? Should we start to
Yeah.
talk about taradiddle a bit?
Yeah. Anybody know what a taradiddle is? Some of you do. Tardiddle is an English, perfectly good English word.
I had to look it up.
Someone told me, oh, your pictures are tardiddles. I said, what the hell are you talking about? This was years ago. Actually, Adrian Depe, who worked here. And I said, what is tardiddle? She said, it's a little provocation. It's a lie. It's a little slight. Something, just a sweet little joke. It was a sweet little joke, a lie, pretentious obfuscation, or whatever. And I originally hadn't really conceived of my work quite that way, though I realized as I went through my work, historically, I had been dealing with certain kinds of deceptions that the world gives us and that I find. I didn't create them. I only created them by making and framing them. And that the whole medium itself, and I mean this in a good way, by taking everything out of context, is creating a whole new kind of structure, a lie. It isn't truth. It isn't fact, for sure. Though I suppose if 1,000 people take 1,000 pictures of the same thing, you have some real fact there, which is part of what crowdsourcing is. So,
Here's a quote.
here's a quote by the great writer James Salter, who died a couple of years ago. And I always like this quote. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it pertains to photography in this way. I just substitute writing for photographing. And the truth is in the work itself, in the process. And so that's been a sort of mantra of mine in the last number of years, that quote, sort of a guiding idea. Tardiddle is about the act of photography as well as how photography is presented, or how imagery is presented, distorts our world, but also creates a laughter, creates a joke, creates a tenderness also, and a real new perception of what was or wasn't out there. So this is just the basic sequence. I'm going to go through it quickly, because you all can all buy the book. And it went through many iterations. I have thousands of these pictures. And the sequencing was very important. And originally we were going to do 3 across, in some cases 4 across. And just the publishing and the act of maybe not giving everything away in a given structure reduced it down to a more simplified presentation. So the sequences are very important, and the relationship of one sequence to the next, of course. And this is Michael's favorite street picture. You know, people on the street, it's a street picture. I'm a street photographer. I hate that term. It's a bad term. It's a dumb term.
And so, I have the same reaction with many of these photographs. I laugh. Is that a reaction you anticipated? Is that a reaction you thought about?
Yeah. I always never understood why everybody turned their nose up and a little bit of humor. And, you know, I think they're silly humor. I hope these aren't silly. And I hope there's underneath it a cultural critique that does exist. And I also realized that I was free sometime for the last 20 years to photograph anything and everything, anywhere, any place that I wanted to photograph. I didn't have to go out and just photograph portraits, or just do landscapes, or just do street pictures, or just do automobile pictures. I did do the grant project, which was very focused. But I realized the freedom and the joy of photographing was being able to see anywhere and anything and try to make something out of it.
You talk about this project as freeing yourself from self-imposed limitations, self-imposed rules.
Yeah. And my only rule is, and it's only a rule because I'm probably not very good at constructing things. working in a studio per se. Also, I love engaging people, I love engaging and looking at the world, I love to travel. So I just decided I don't have to limit myself to a particular structure. The structure is in me. After all, I've been doing this for 50 years, more or less. I've been teaching actually, one way or another for 51, I think. I am who I am, green eggs and ham. And you can't, you sort of, all of the stuff that I know about the world, politics, ethics, social issues, and the medium of photography and art, it's going to come out. And yes, you have to edit all the time. And there's a lot of junk. And then you find, someone says, well, why didn't you put that picture in there? Blah, blah, blah. And then you work on the relationships of pictures to pictures. And out of that comes a body of work. Is it conceptual? Yes, because I've conceived myself. I've conceived my vision over years.
Do you think some of that comes from just your years of involvement in being in organizations where you're constantly up against artists and curators and collectors and gallerists who try to stake out what they do, who try to stake out what photography is?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there have been cabals, let's call it, good old boy networks, good old girl networks, and all kinds of things that say, well, you can't do this, you can't photograph that, that's not ethical, or that, you know, who are you? You're an outsider, you can't photograph, you know, these people. I don't agree with it. I think you have to present yourself honestly, you have to have good intentions, and I think they will come out. And I think it's important that we explore as much as possible. I think it was Unamuno who said something like, you know, I want to get rid of racism, just travel. It's really important to look. It's important to try to behold what you've seen. Don't forget to see it before you behold it. And I feel very liberated and free to do that. And, I really actually, historically, I've found that the kind of ideologies that certain institutions and certain museums and even galleries have forced upon the world are pretty limited. I think artists have to be constantly challenged.
Can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I keep drifting away. I apologize. It's intrusive. Like me, my camera, it's intrusive.
But as a teacher and a director of a program, do you see this identification of what kind, you know, what you think of yourself as an artist as being a process that's essential, that's necessary to sort of go through and then shake things off?
Well, I don't know if you have to just say, okay, this is this, and I have to go against it. I'm not sure about that. I think you have to go through your own discovery of a set of values, and those values are sometimes formed, and often formed in opposition to things that you maybe even thought were important. You discover they aren't so important. And at the same time, you are a product of the people you're around, the students I'm around, the faculty I'm around. This is my community here. This is my studio. I work here almost every day. So, my life is photography. I have to say, in all honesty, I grew up learning disabled, and I discovered how to learn through making pictures. I found it incredible that I could actually legitimize myself by becoming a visual artist. Other than English. I hate writing, but I appreciate good writing. I think it's the most lonely, tedious thing anybody can do. Being a photographer of the type that I am, I get to engage, walk, move, I can take care of all my hyperactivity. I can walk, talk, do this kind of thing. And I learned to do it well, I think. And it gave me a certain kind of confidence and credibility. And that happens with a lot of people. Some people discover music that way. Some people discover drawing, or some people discover engineering. So it liberated me in every way. I felt, and still feel very strongly, that that's the reason to do it. And I would be very sad not to be able to photograph. I'd like to photograph more than I do. I have a daytime job.
Yeah.
Should we look at more of the work?
Yeah.
So, a year or so ago, I was organizing photographs, and that's the thing. I have the largest collection in the world of Charles Traub's. And I was looking through a box, and I discovered something I call the funnies. This is a little selection of those. These were pictures done in the 70s. There are a few people in this room who knew me then. And this particular picture was a transition between some landscape work I've done that some people may know, and the later work at the 70s, early 70s, that I call the funnies. And these were all done in Chicago, and were done with a Rolleiflex 6x6, and it had a lens shader that was too small for the lens. And I liked it. I liked the portable idea. I liked the idea. It's voyeurism, reference, and stuff. So this is just a collection of pictures I thought were funny at the time. So, and I think in a funny way, they relate to the tar devils, and they are the precursors. And they also reference back to my landscape work. A lot of hair, a lot of plant life. A lot of hair. Looks like grass. These few were from a series called Beach, which was my first book, and sort of got a lot of attention at the time. Life and display on what they call the Beach, 1973 to 76. Rome. The twins. So you can see a lot of the same things using pictures that were found, that are part of the scene, or propaganda that's out there, or publicity, or advertising.
And a lot more faces obscured
Yeah.
at this point.
Well, that's an interesting point. A lot of people say, why are you chopping the heads off? Because I wasn't trying to be violent. So, that's so violent. It was about, not trying to single out the gesture, not the face, not the personality. As in this picture, these are types whose suits all match the buildings. But I get faces. Did a lot of pictures at parties, boxing matches, tenderness.
So we moved.
So this is the funnies, and that was the last picture. Okay, stop. After that, I remember at the time, why chopping off heads? Okay, well, I think I'll do some pictures with heads on. That's when I did the lunchtime pictures. And I also did a series about Skid Row, I call it, pictures of Bowery people and Skid Row and what they called Uptown in Chicago, homeless derelicts. With your portrait, which is another book.
When do you stop shooting film?
I haven't shot film since 1968. No, 1998.
That'll be well.
And I have no reason to go back to do it. very happy not to do it. I have all kinds of discussion with people, don't you love the quality of film? Yeah, it's great. But I love the quality that you can get from the digital image and the possibilities that it holds in all kinds of delivery and in all kinds of ways. And also the quality of printing is just as difficult, just as demanding as conventional printing. And I think it's not toxic. I think you have a harder editing problem digitally. You have to edit all the time. You have to be very astute. Not everybody says, well, hold on to all these, you know, everything you shoot. No, I delete it as I go. So, and it's cheaper. It's a lot cheaper, students.
So why don't we take a few more questions, and then
Yeah.
we'll get to the last section of slides. Questions about the work, about
Wow,
the
you
book.
had a question?
Yeah, I had a question.
We got a mic coming.
You've probably heard this. I mean, you've told this story. Everybody's probably heard it, but I'd really like to hear again a little bit about the time you went shooting with Gary Winogrand in L.A. and maybe what you learned from that. Because I've been thinking about that episode a lot lately.
Well, I've been thinking about it too, because I just saw the film. How many have seen the film about Gary? Good. The person who made it was a student of mine and an intern for me,
Sasha Waters-Fryer.
Sasha Waters-Fryer, and actually I thought it was awful. I liked it dearly. I think it was, I'm sure it was limited by all kinds of things about the estate, whatever. But seeing Gary in that manner and just revisiting a whole history that I had with him. I knew him in Chicago. He came to teach when I was a student there for a year. And then in New York when I was at Mike Gallery, we represented him. And I was often on Fifth Avenue shooting lunchtime pictures when he was out there with the whole gang that was in that movie. I thought it was bad because it was the same old group, sycophantic, and at the same time, just pictures and talking heads. It didn't take me anywhere afresh. Now, I knew him very well. But Light Gallery opened in California in 1981, I think, 80, 81. I resigned shortly after, completely after, because I thought it was a stupid, dumb thing to do. I wanted to be an artist, not a dealer. But it was expanding. But the point I'm trying to make, Gary knocked on my door in my hotel at 7 o'clock in the morning. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm sleeping. I said, get up, let's go shooting. And so I trundled down as fast as I could, and I was sort of honored that he had done that. And we went out, I think, 3 or 4 days in a row, every morning, in his big old Cadillac, while he shot out the windows. We went to the market, and I saw a lot of LA that I didn't know. I didn't know LA at all, actually. And we drove around, and he shot from the car, and I had my big Rolleiflex. It wasn't a very good camera to shoot from the car. And it was a great experience. I mean, he was a wonderful shooter, a wonderful photographer. He had his opinions. He was a bully in a way, and in a good way, I think. And he had what said wonderful, quick wit and smart focus on a particular form of photography. And it did influence me. And also, I think a great disservice has been done to him by not letting the public see all that work that was undeveloped and subsequently developed. It should have been projected as contact sheets on big screens and let the audience decide what he did later on. I suspect 50 years from now, there people are going to go reading through all those pictures, the late work, the work that he never selected, and find a whole new interpretation of a social condition of life. So that, I don't know if that answers your question.
It's the beginning of an answer.
Huh?
Yeah, it's the beginning of an answer. I mean, it's a great story.
And I admired him greatly. I think also one of the things the film missed was, like Sharkowski defines Winogrand. I think it was the other way around. I think Winogrand really put a lot of thinking into Sharkowski's mind that Sharkowski then organized in his own way. The values of what photography was, I think, were very much defined by Winogrand's thinking in terms of the Sharkowski moment idea. Now, do I agree with all that? No. In fact, I fought against it most of my career.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was
Yeah.
getting at.
I think it was something like the White House was trying. I mean, it warped the possibilities of expansion of photography a great deal. The picture generation and others who were working in all kinds of new forms broke away from that. And Louise Lawler sort of suggested that. I don't know, does that
Yeah.
satisfy you? Does anybody want
Yeah.
to know more? I didn't mean to go into such depth about it.
No, I think that's fascinating. Do you feel William Klein had almost that kind of impact on you?
Definitely.
In what way?
I was already shooting. I met Klein in Paris, I think, in 79, 80, same period. Well, I didn't remember that before. And I found Klein a remarkable energy, creative talent, far more interesting than a lot of photographers of that generation, because he was a great designer, a wonderful filmmaker. I mean, perhaps one of the best documentary filmmakers of the 20th century. And he was unknown in this country. He an American, but an expatriate. And he's still been ignored by the MoMA establishment and by that world. Anybody who hasn't seen some of his films should do so. Most of the students and people here probably know some of the photographs. He too was a character not in some ways like Gary. They were big men, smart, tough, brash, self-confident. I don't think they liked each other. Yeah, Klein was, Klein's grit. I just found it amazing, and also that he took the same vision everywhere and anywhere. Sort of, in a way, he made the same body of work, but it was always different based upon where he was. Moscow, Paris.
Any more questions before we show the final slideshow?
So the final little piece, and to the audience out there who are not seeing this visually, I apologize. Johnny Chapman and I yesterday put some of the pictures that were in the pile of tardittles that aren't in the book, and we just made another little sequence yesterday. And I didn't know what to call it, so I just called it By and By. And the point of this is to show you that, when you shoot like I shoot, you got lots of choices, lots of problems, lots of issues to deal with because you have so much work. And the digital world has allowed that. I would have never been able to have see all these if I were shooting, film, and much less processing them. By the way, seeing things on the screen for me is perfectly valid. I see no reason, that a body of work shouldn't be presented that way or projected. I mean, if you go back to Nan Goldman's the sexual dependency.
Valid or sexual
Valid,
dependency.
it was most beautiful and still most beautiful as a slideshow. And slides are really remarkable things. And the digital world allows that kind of thing even more. A little pornography, a little lust. This is a gun show in Tucson. This is the Vietnam Memorial in Chicago.
And when we talked about this work, he said it wasn't that these didn't make the book. It's just that there are so many images.
Yeah, you can only deal with so much, there's time limitations, printing limitations, cost limitations, editing limitations. And frankly, you can easily get lost in your own work. I mean, you lose your objectivity. I've been fortunate that I have worked with former graduate students. Do all of you here? He's in the back. He's very instrumental in putting my collections of everything together and helping me edit and sequence, and then we reject the sequence and start over. Johnny worked with this yesterday with me. I'm very fortunate to have rather remarkably talented people around me who work with me all the time. That's a menorah.
Good.
This is in Branson, Missouri. This is a whole area of abandoned McMansions that never got finished. We forgot to straighten that up. That one. So that's just a sample of maybe a couple more books on Tardiddle 2, Tardiddle 3. You gotta buy the whole set to go on a while. Questions? Boy,
Yeah.
hope I didn't bore you.
Oh,
Yeah.
So do you ever stop yourself and like not be directly political, especially with what's going on today, and grab the camera and try to be more, not propaganda, but kind of like be more direct politically?
You'd
Do
be
you
more
stop?
politically obvious in the pictures.
Yeah, like to make like, kind of, and it'd be something else, of course, it'd be.
Yeah. I think if I had the assignment, Mark Peterson, do you all know who he is?
Yeah.
Wonderful photographer, who's working very political, but stylistically very interesting, very profound. And he is a journalist also, and makes pictures that are about the current political situation. I don't see him as an illustrator or a photojournalist in the newspaper sense, but I think the body of his work is very powerful. And I think if I had another time, maybe I would have worked like that. I never had that opportunity. I never was a photographer who went into conflict, so to speak. I did try to do it once. I wanted to go to Ethiopia, where I had been as a Peace Corps volunteer in the early 80s. And I went to an editor at Time magazine, picture editor, and I said, could you get me? I wanted to see what Ethiopia looked like. Could you get me? Because there was turmoil, turnover of the communist regime. Could you get me some press credentials? And she said, oh no, you have to go in there. So, just a famous British marketer. Don McCullum and I talked about this at an event up in Maine at the Maine Farm. He said, you'd have been crazy to go without press credentials. So I never did it, and I realized somehow I didn't have the clout to get into that world. I didn't do it. And subsequently, the big famine in that's the other thing she said. Oh, who would be interested in Ethiopia? A few weeks later, the famine became a big story.
And when you
That's
were
not why I was going.
when you were in the Peace Corps, you and your wife had sort of intentions on being journalists.
Yeah,
and
we
being
did.
the journalism.
Yeah, we definitely did. I was a journalism minor, she was a journalism major, and she, that was her desire. I mean, a curious story. we both took a photo course the last semester of our senior year. She took it in the journalism department with an old-fashioned teacher who used speed graphic, was talking about how to do the fire and how to do all that. And somehow, my instinct said, no, I don't know, because we didn't want to do it together, said, go to the art department. I had never taken a studio course. And I was lucky enough, frankly, to discover photography in the context of an art form with the great photographer who happened to be was, Art Sinzabab, was a great photographer, period. So I sort of lucked into photography in a very nice way.
Question?
I'm curious about, besides funny, is there any other motive keep you taking photos?
Well, if I were Gary Winogrand, I would say, yeah, because I have to do it and I want to see what it looks like. But of course there's other motifs. The motif of a critique of what things look like, what things are out there, how people interact, don't interact, how they're defined by the images around them, how the landscape is a reflection of our culture, many, many other things. I think you have to look at that and decide how they talk to you, as you do with any photograph, any piece of art. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your process of sequencing, specifically when you get through 2, 4, 6, or 8 images and you decide, oh, this flow isn't working anymore? What causes you to change that?
Do you want to go back to some parents? Right.
The by and by were all done yesterday. We haven't really considered much. We just did. Well, that was those are from Italy a couple of years ago, and I guess the relationship was the picture of the man is repeated in the pattern on the wall, and this is Italy. This is the Disneyland of Italy, which I have to say, given all the times I've spent in Italy, you see something is lost over and over again in the layering of Italy as everybody becomes homogenized, everybody wears the same blue jeans. You kind of almost miss the grandeur of its ancient history and its art to a sort of tourist view. Again, that sequence led into this one. There's a little Italy over there, maybe. And then there's the whole, it's repeated, and start dealing with, this is a green guy, a real guy with a fake thing, and a fake guy with a real. So you start making associations between pictures, and then you say to yourself, oh, that's too obvious, and so maybe they are in some cases. And as I said, sometimes Yoav and I worked out sequences that were 4 in a row. And my designer said, you know, you're giving it all away. You don't need to hit it over the head too much. So we took a lot of pictures out. And we went through, what, 3, 4 maquettes of this before we came up with this structure. And that's another thing that the digital world does for bookmaking. You can use InDesign, make a sequence, print it out on the office printer, and see what it's going to look like in 5 minutes. And then you can do it again, and you can change something. You know, it used to take months to get those kinds of returns on what you did. And people need to do it. You need to keep doing it. It's not easy. First of all of these were laid out on walls at first, lots, hundreds of them. You know, they were just quick proofs. And you keep editing, and you know, I could go back and edit it again. There's a point where you tell you, I don't know when to stop. which is very complicated. So I think the digital world allows you a lot more flexibility. At the same time, it increases the discipline to make judgments, because the possibilities are infinite. Does that answer your question? We can talk. Any more questions? Yes, Jack Saul. Colleague for many years, great artist.
Thanks. I won't tell my Gary Winograd story, though.
What?
I won't tell my Gary Winograd story, though.
Yeah.
Although it's like Gallery and Fifth Avenue. But, no, in this most recent book, it seems to me that the vernacular photography comes to the forefront for the first time. It's always been part of your vocabulary as a photographer, but somehow it seems to be in the first person vernacular photography. Is that feels right, or am I off base?
I'm not sure what you mean by first person, but if you mean, it's also about my interaction with them. I'm not sure what you mean by first person.
No, it's almost as if you've created these photographic iconography that suddenly I can see, like all of your other photographs, but here brought up to the forefront with a kind of reference to not only photography itself, but in making the photograph.
Yeah, no, yes, I think that's absolutely so, and I think I'm very conscious of the process of making the picture as a statement of what the picture is about, and what the camera does to frame and take it out of context or recontextualize whatever's there. I can't paraphrase it very well, but David Campany's essay is all about that. And I think I was very pleased with how he saw that structure and talked about it as being about what picture making is about also.
He mentions how throughout the work there's all these pictures of pictures and frames within frames, and just the ubiquitous of photography and description, and what the way you can sort of treat that and handle that in this somewhat humorous way, and this way that compares real and artifice.
Yeah. I mean, that's a spectacle idea, or simulacrum, or it's the Disneyland of everything. This picture is Mall of America, is a weddings complex where you buy all your wedding clothes. Guys come in there, and this picture is an auto repair store in Brazil. Of course, you don't know that. Perhaps. This is another thing. If you go to my website, it tells you where this is and what it was. We decided to leave that out of the book, but you can look at it and see where this was taken and where it was, and a little bit about it. I'll tell you as an author. Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think it's very much in my mind and in my conceptual notion, which comes not predetermined, but as part of who I am, and through the practice of making lots of pictures for many years.
There's a lot of Gary in this too. There's so much Luigi Gary in this.
Yeah. Gary was, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I knew him very well. We didn't speak the same language. I don't know how we communicated, but we were friends. And I traveled with him in Italy. My Italy book is part of that experience, the Dolce Via. And also, I did a book called Italy Observed, where I actually paired a lot of the Italian photography of the period that he championed with literature. It's about Italy. That humor, that critique that's at the base of his work, I think, is very much in my work. And I think that same critique is in Winograd. It's also in in Klein. And it's handled differently. They're all influences. You don't jump out of your influences. I mean, everybody, I remember a well-known photographer who's now dead saying, "Oh, I never studied photography." And I was at a lecture with him, and I remember standing up and saying, "Well, weren't you a student at Columbia College in Chicago for 4 years?" Artists never want to acknowledge their roots, which is quite sad.
Oh, we have more? Yeah.
I'm curious if you consider these pairings permanently linked now?
What?
If you can, these pairings of images, are they permanently linked for you? If you were to display them in, say, a gallery, would you want them to be, you know, mates?
Oh, that's a good question.
And I have another one.
I'm not sure about that. I think it might be nice, but then someone else, well, this is a better pairing, you know. Maybe all of you buy all these pictures, the collectors, they should make those pairings. The other thing is that, you know, the galleries have their own interpretations of what something should be. You know, and they may want a plastron all up on the wall, or they may want to say, oh, you have to do just this one, we'll do 5 of these, we'll make them 50 by 60. That's a marketplace issue. I'm not against it, I love people to buy them.
I'm also curious how much you enjoy that pairing process.
Oh,
and
that's
if you
a-
consider it to be like a shooting.
Well, that's a great fun. I mean,
Yeah.
and it's easier and much more fun if you have a space to do it in, but also you can work with these little printouts that you get from your digital printer. And then you can do another InDesign, make a little book. And, you know, you can do that in 5 minutes, and if you want it bound, you can go over to Kinko's, they'll bind it for you, and it almost looks like the real thing. That's really fun, and I think Yoav, who worked with me for the last 2 years, over 2 years, I mean, we kind of get lost in that. And then we sort of miss sometimes, let's get out of this space here, you know, think about this. That's the great fun. That's the fun of making books. Producing and funding and all of that is horrible expense. And then getting them out there is another expense. So that's why I did the grant book as an item. I wanted to make it accessible. You can buy it for, I think, $3.95, $4. How much is it? $4? Something like that.
$4 or $5.
$4 or $5,
Right.
and anybody can get it. You know, and it's just, it's elegant on the screen. So,
And it allows you to do a bit more interactive.
yeah, you can interact with it. You can hear voice. An actor reads Grant's memoirs. And I would urge all the young people in this room, explore all these possibilities. You don't have to follow the tracks of the 20th century.
Any more questions?
I don't really have a question, just an observation. I've known Charles for a number of years. I was one of his earliest students. One of the things I like about looking at these images is that, for me, they reveal as much about Charles as they reveal something about the subjects that are being photographed. And for me, when I look at Gary Winogrard's photographs, the woman on 57th Street by IBM, I think that photograph succeeds in the very same way. The connection between the maker and the subject that's being photographed. And they're so powerful. And I'm grateful that I am here.
Well, thank you. I would just riff on, well, just explain this. This is a picture that someone might think about they're angry at me. Maybe they were, but actually they were furious because the airline had lost their luggage. And I'm fine too. So, you know, the context is always the mystery. And yet they are quizzical about me too. it's always about the photographer. Any art is always about the artist who made it. I think that's another kind of divide that existed between this canon that of the late 20th century that was propagated by the moment thinking, that somehow the photographer was supposed to be omnipotent, somehow supposed to be out of the scene, supposed to let the camera just see the detail of the thing itself with as much objectivity as possible. Well, I think it's simply absurd that you make a kind of theoretical position like that. Every photographer is intrusive in some way. And that's what makes Klein's picture so wonderful. He's putting his goddamn camera in everybody's face, and he's revealing something about humanity that is full of warts, full of life. And the same thing happens with Mark Peterson's work. He puts that camera right in, he breaks that boundary. And you could be critical of it. You could step and hurt somebody doing it, physically or, you know. But I think you have to put your values into those pictures, and that may be part of where you are in position to the subject matter that you're dealing with as an artist. So, and Winograd, oddly, was the exception to the MoMA rule, in a funny way.
All right, I think that could be a good place to end.
Let me just say one thing. I want to thank Michael for doing this, and making it much easier on me, but also for all the work he's done here. He had his program going before he came back to SVA, and it's once a week.
Almost,
Everybody
yeah.
should subscribe to it. And then we don't usually have live audiences, but we're going to try to do more things with more artists. And he deals with a lot of different lens and screen artists, conceptual ones, and installation ones, and documentary ones, and performance ones, and mostly younger people than me, usually. But, so stay tuned. He's the Studs Turco.
Thank you. So I think we're going to have a signing to follow.